Okay, welcome to another episode of Revenge Motion Graphics, and today we're going to reverse engineer this. So this is sort of an Apple promo look to this, and we're going to do this all without third-party plugins, and we won't do this without Plex or anything like that. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, first thing we'll do is we'll make a new background. So let's go to New Solid, and we'll just call this BKG. Kind of a sort of a mid gray here, and hit OK. And let's add a new camera, and we want to have a 2-node camera. 50mm is a good preset. Let's hit OK, hit OK again, and let's bring the camera towards the bottom here just so that it's out of the way here. And let's make another new solid, and we'll name this solid beam, and let's hit OK. And let's move this to the topmost position because we're going to make this the main layer to generate this beam effect. So let's grab the beam effect here, bring that onto the beam layer, and let's change some of these values so that they're sort of zeroed out here. For length, let's make that 100%. Let's go ahead and make the starting and ending thickness maybe 3 each for right now. Softness will bring down to 0, and on the inside and outside colors, let's make those kind of like a dark gray here. Okay, let me do that. Okay, so now we've got just a solid line here. Now what this is in terms of the beam effect is it draws a line between the starting point and the ending point, traditionally in sort of a 2D space. Okay, so our goal is to get this actually function in a 3D space, in a 3D environment. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and make a new null, and we'll rename this null center point. And let's make another new null, and let's rename this outer point 01. And let's just give it a different color, maybe like a green or something. And let's make both of these layers 3D. Okay, so our goal is to draw the line in 3D space between these 2 points. Okay, we're going to do this with some expressions, and they're not going to be drastically crazy expressions or anything like that, but just know that there will be expressions here. So let's get started here. So if we go to the beam here, I'm going to basically twirl down to the effect beam, and we'll start with the starting point and the ending point. So let's start with the starting point. Option click the stopwatch to go to the expression here. Okay, so here if I just pick whip to the center point like this, I get an expression that basically points to that 3D center point effect. So if I hit return, or enter rather, I get an error. Okay, now the way to fix this is I want to add one additional section to this expression. This is going to be very important. We'll be doing this throughout the tutorial, and that is dot to comp, open parentheses, close parentheses, open bracket, close bracket. Okay, put in 0, 0, 0. Okay, so what this very simple addition does is it says, yes, I know this is a 2D point, okay, but I do want it to actually correspond and position itself to a 3D point. Okay, defined by this center point null here. So if I drag this thing around, okay, even though the center point is 3D, it's still keeping track with my 2D beam. Okay, let me undo that position. Okay, now for the ending point, we will do something similar. But before we do that, I want to arrange a couple of things different here because it's going to be very important. One thing is I want to put the center point below the beam. Okay, because I want to have the outer point on top and the beam as the second layer. Okay, and then I'm going to add a couple more layers here before we do the ending point, because that's going to be important as well. So one thing I'll do is I'll go to new, and I will go to null object. This null object I will rename control main. Then I'm going to click away. If I go to my ellipse tool now and draw out a circle, I'm going to call this just circle. Okay, and for good measure, if I can spell circle here, and for good measure, I'm going to make sure that circle layer is selected, click on my pan behind tool, and command double click, which resets these anchor point to the center of my circle. Okay, so now we have 7 layers, and I'm going to duplicate this circle and rename this circle center circle. Okay, it's just that we have a total of 8 layers here, because the number of layers will be very important here. Okay, so with my circle, I'm going to put that below, or rather in the middle of my outer point in my beam. The control main, I'm just going to put that on top of my background, and then finally the center circle, I'll put that on top of the control main. Okay, so these 5 layers here can pretty much be in any order really, but most importantly we want to have the outer point, the circle, and the beam in this particular order. Okay, and again, the reason why I'm doing this now is because my expression for my ending point in my circle will reference the number of layers. So let's go ahead and go to the beam, and now we're going to work on the end point. So Option, click on the stopwatch, and we're going to write out a couple of lines of code here. Okay, so first thing I'll write out is letter R. So why letter R? No particular reason. This could be any letter, any word we want, but we do want to define R as this comp, capital C-O-M-P. It has to be a capital C due to the JavaScript nature of the expression. And we want to type in dot, and then go to this library menu here and click on num layers. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to determine how many layers are in this composition. So remember, all the things that we've added here, there's 8 layers here. Okay, let me go back in that expression. So I want to calculate the number of layers in this composition. Now, here's the more important part of this. There are 8 layers, okay, but the beam is the 3rd layer. So 8 minus 3 is 5, okay? So to determine, the position of the beam layer from the total number of layers, it will be 5. But I want to go 1 less. So instead, I'm going to type in 4, and I'll explain why in a minute here. And then I'm going to close out this whole line here by semicolon. Hit return for the next line. Then I'm going to have a new line starting with letter S. So I'm going to define S as, very simply, as index. So what does that mean? So index basically means look at the layer I'm on and see what the index number is. In this case, it's a number 3. Here's where my indexes are. Okay, I'm going to hit return again, and I'm going to type in T now is equal to, just simple math, R minus S, and then hit a semicolon. Okay, and then finally we'll tie this whole thing up with another toComp based expression here. So let's do it this way. This comp, okay, dot layer. Okay, now which layer do we need? Well, we want to use the index of whatever layer is defined by these lines of code. So in this case, I'm going to type in open parentheses, letter T, and close parentheses. Okay, and specifically, I'm going to type in dot toComp, the same toComp that we've done before. Again, open closed parentheses, open close brackets, and type in 0, 0, 0. Okay, so again, what this, these 4 lines of code are going to do basically is every time I duplicate the outer point and the beam, it will always target that duplicate. Okay, so if I click away, now we've got that expression. Now you're not going to see anything here because our outer point and our center point are in the same space. Okay, so let's fix that. So if I go to the outer point and I type in A for the anchor point, I'm going to change the z-axis because I want to actually offset that null. Okay, so if I type in something like 700, okay, it basically moves that outer point away from the center. And if I hit Shift R, I can also do a couple more things to the X rotation and the Y rotation to randomize their positions in this sphere that is about 700 pixels. Let me show you what that means. So if I click on the X rotation, okay, and I type in the following expression, okay, random numbers, seed random. Okay, so what is seed random? Seed random basically is a way to tell After Effects to pick a number and stick to it rather than generate a new number every time. Okay, so to sort of turn this on, I'm going to delete all this stuff in the parentheses and type in 0, 1. That turns on that expression or that line. And now I'm going to basically say, well, pick a random number, and let's do a random number between 0 and 360. In this case, all I have to do is just type in 360. Okay, so if I zoom out here, it put a random position for this null somewhere in my 700 pixel radius of my sphere here. Okay, so let's do the same thing for the y. Copy that into the y, and now what it's basically doing is generating a random position based on x rotation and y rotation of this outer point, which is actually a null object. Okay, and if you notice, the beam is drawing the line automatically to where it happens to be. Okay, so if I in fact click on the outer point and the beam and Command D as many times as I want, it will generate a line to wherever that point happens to be in this sphere. And let me go ahead and make my background a little darker here so you can see kind of where those nulls are ending up here temporarily. So everywhere there's a null placed 700 pixels away from the center, we have a beam that follows it. Okay, let me change the background back to where it was. Okay, great. So let me go ahead and delete all those duplicates just so that we are going back to the original 3. And here my original 3, the outer point, the circle, and the beam. Okay, again, what I have done is, if you look at the expression for the outer point, it basically would generate a new position randomly, and if you look at the anchor point, it's going to be 700 pixels away from the center, but around the sphere in a random x and y rotation. Now, next trick is to get the circle to do the same thing, to follow the endpoint. And here we'll do a similar expression. So if I click on the P for position of the circle, option click the stopwatch, I can again type in some similar lines of code here. So again, actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy some of this from the ending point here. So let me copy this whole thing, and I'll put that into my circle position. Now here we need to, before we hit enter, we need to change a couple things. The main thing is we need to change the R. Okay, so rather than it being defined by number of layers, we're going to delete that, and instead pick whip the beam layer below. Okay, and we get this line of code here. Now we're not done, because what I want to do here is just type in simply .index and then semicolon. Whoops, let me go back and put .index and then semicolon, and that closes out that line. Okay, so what I'm doing here basically is whatever is generated by these 3 lines of code, that's going to determine the index, which is going to be what this T represents. Okay, so if I click away, I have my circle also snapping to whatever this randomly generated null is. So now what I can do is click on these 3 layers, hit Command D as many times as I want, and I get a beam and a circle that gets drawn to whatever that outer null is. And if I actually rotate this around, you can sort of see that it is a 3D object. Okay, great. Alright, now I'm going to undo all those duplicates because I do want to do a couple more things before I start messing with this. So we're going to go back to where we just had these 3 here. So one other thing we'll do, let's go ahead and fix this point here, which should be in the center. So that's just a very simple thing. All I really have to do with my center circle here is just click on the position of it, and we'll go ahead and option click on the position and pick whip to the center point. Okay, and again we'll get an error here, but that's because we need to simply type in .toComp, and you'll probably already know what I'm going to do here. 0, 0, 0. Okay, now we're going to have this center point in the center here. So that's the sort of basic setup of this whole system here. So again, if I click on these 3 guys and hit Command D a couple of times, it will generate a beam and a circle wherever the null happens to be for the outer point. Okay, now since there could be a lot of duplicates, or potentially a lot of duplicates, we want to have a way to control things like size of the circle, the length of the line, the color of the line, and a bunch of different things. So this is going to take us to the next section. Okay, so the next section is, if we go into our effects here, and if we open up our expression controls, we have a series of expression controls that work with pretty much anything that's linked to it. So here we have an object or a layer called control main, okay, and it's just a layer. We can even turn that off. We really need to see it. And if I apply an effect called slider control to that control main, you'll see it in the presets here in the properties. So, and I want to actually have this visible most of the time, so I'm going to click on this little lock icon here. So what does this slider do? Well, for one thing, let's say we wanted to have a way to control the thickness of the line. Okay, so what we can do is we can rename this slider control, start thickness. Okay, and if we go into our beam, there is in fact a starting and an ending thickness. Okay, now we can actually link that to the slider. So if I option click on the stopwatch, all I have to do is pick whip to that slider, hit enter, and now whatever the number here, okay, is going to basically determine the starting thickness. In this case it's 0, so I can change that maybe to like 2. Okay, and if I add another slider, so I can even just duplicate it here, I can rename this end thickness, get rid of that too, and here I can go to my end thickness, option click the stopwatch, pick whip into that slider. Okay, in this case it will be 2 as well, so if I wanted to make this different, I can do 1, for example. So this particular control main is going to control all aspects of our system here. One of the things you might want to do is change the size of the circle as we duplicate. So again, I'll add another slider control. I'll rename this circle size, and I can go into my circle here, and there is in fact a contents ellipse, and there's a ellipse path, and I can click on the option stopwatch here and pick whip that into the slider. Okay, so in this case it's set to 0, but I can change that dynamically if I want something else. Okay, and I can do that same thing again to the center circle as well. So again, I'll twirl down until I see contents, ellipse, size, option click the stopwatch, and again I can do that to that same circle size slider control. And now we've got one control that controls the size of these circles. Okay, and I can keep on adding more and more stuff here. For example, I can do color of the actual beam itself. So again, this time I'll go to the color control, and I'll put that on my control main, and it has a color. I can go to my beam here, and it also has, let me twirl these up, an inside and outside color. I can option click on the stopwatch in both of these guys and pick whip both to the color of my color control here and here. Okay, and now I have one color control that's controlling the color of the beam itself. Okay, I can even, if I wanted to, well, actually let's go ahead and do that. I can even go to the beam, or I can go to the circle color control as well, and also put that in here. So if I wanted to, I'll go to the color control of the circle, which is going to be found in the fill, and option click on that, also pointed towards that same circle. And just for good measure, I'll do the same thing for the center circle. So let's find its color control, fill, option click. Okay, so we have now one color control that's controlling the beam color in both of the circles here, and I can change that around, make it whatever I want. Okay, so there we go. And we can actually even do things like, one of the more interesting things we can do is if we apply a wiggle to the outer point. So if I go into my position here, option click the stopwatch, I can put a wiggle expression there, maybe something like 5, 20. Close that out, and if I play it back, it generates a little bit of noise wiggle position on the end. And I can also control that with a slider control. So if I go into my control main, slider control, let's rename this wiggle amount, and here I can just grab that number 20. All I'm doing is simply putting my cursor to encapsulate the 20 only, and I can pick whip that to the slider. It's going to generate this huge expression here, which I don't have to worry about. Hit OK, or enter rather, and now if I play this back, right now it's set to 0, but I can dynamically make this whatever I want in terms of the wiggle amount. Okay, so all these things you can do to the control main, so that when you do duplicate these things, you don't have to do it separately. You can all control that with one. So for example, let's make a bunch of copies here. Let's do maybe 10 copies, and they're all doing their thing here. And let's say that the wiggle is just too much. I can bring that down to maybe like 10, and they all have that change in effect. Okay, so let me undo those duplicates and start with these 3. Okay, so this is sort of the main reason why I'm doing this with expressions, because we could definitely use plugins and all that, but I just thought I'd show you how to do this with just expressions. So the next step I want to do is sort of generate, if you look at the final result here, is sort of this strings that looks like strings being broken here, and a little bit of that sort of Apple motion graphics effect. Okay, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to generate a bunch of these, maybe not a bunch, maybe about 20 or so of these points here. Maybe something like that. And I don't want to go too many because it will slow down the system just a little bit. And I can also purge all memory and disk cache. Sometimes that helps with performance. Okay, I do want to make the wiggle a little bit less, so maybe something like this. Okay, so what I'm going to do basically is go to my camera here. Okay, right now the camera that we made, it was a 2-point camera, which is really good for example, kind of rotating around our scene here, taking a look at some of the things that is generated by this 3D object. But in this case, what I found is it's simpler if I double click the camera and change this to one node camera. Okay, it won't change anything in our scene here, but I won't have to worry about moving the other node that it's looking at here. So, and I'll also switch this to 2 views horizontal, because I can sort of see what's going on in my scene on this side. And if I zoom out, I can even see where my camera is as well, so that I can sort of get a better idea what's going on in my 3D scene here. Okay, so what I'll do is, as this thing is playing out, okay, maybe at some point, maybe at the 3-second mark here or so, the center point here goes sort of down. So I'll just go to the P for position and create a keyframe there, and maybe I'll do like a couple, like a 2-second move here, and I'll just bring down on the y-axis my center point. Okay, so if I play this back, it kind of just drops down. Okay, so I might need to even move this down further, but we'll see in a second here. Let me move both of these up so I can let me move my screen up a little bit here. So if I do a little bit of playback here, I want to have a little bit of a more defined motion here. So I'll go to the position of that center point, I'll go to the graph editor, and I'll go ahead and separate out my dimensions here. Okay, I don't need to worry about my X or my Z, so I'll click on the stopwatch there, and let's concentrate on the Y. So maybe on the Y position here, I'll just put in an S-curve animation here. So we'll have like a slow, fast, slow animation. Okay, let's take a look at that. Just something that gives a little bit more interest. And as the circle, or rather as the center point goes down, I want to have my camera also follow it. So maybe what I'll do is go to my camera here, and I will generate in the position, maybe I'll split those dimensions as well, and only on the y-axis I'll go to that same first keyframe for the null y position of the camera, and I'm going to drop it down so it's following the action here, maybe to the center of the screen. So let's take a look at that. Alright, and I'll also put a little bit of a S-curve on that animation as well. There we go. And what I might even do is maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more into the action here. If I go to the camera Z position, I'll go in a little bit, and let's take a look. Okay, that looks pretty good. One thing I can do is, if I want to have my circle size be a little larger, I can always bring that up maybe to about 14 in this case. Okay, and I definitely want to move my null in the camera down more, because at some point I want to see these other circles kind of go on top here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll move down my center point even more, and have the camera follow as well. Okay, maybe even more than that, because I don't really want to see any of these circles as the position moves down here. So let's bring that down even more and compensate with the camera. So maybe something like that. And let's test to see this, what it looks like. Yeah, there we go. So let's play this back one more time. Okay, so at some point, if we kind of follow the Apple example, there's way too much tension here and these things break. What we can simply do is we'll pick one of these beams. I'm going to just pick the first one here. And if I go into the beam effect, there is something in here called time. So with time, if I just pick a point here where I want these things to start breaking, maybe here as an example, what I can do is click on the time stopwatch and generate a keyframe, and then maybe a little bit later on, maybe at this point, I can increase that from 50% to 100%. Okay, what that's going to do, although it's not visible here, is it's going to generate a line that sort of disappears into the outer point here. So let me show you what I mean by that here. So all I'm going to do basically is I'm going to close this up, click on that same beam, click away, and then click back on it, hit the letter U to reveal keyframes. Copy these and select the other beams here and hit V, Command V to paste. Okay, so if I play this back, see all those basically kind of retract into the outer points to give the appearance that there are strings breaking here. Okay, the only problem is, a couple of things is it doesn't look too good in terms of its actual breaking, and it's all uniform. Okay, so let me undo that. So what I'm going to do here is go to my beam effect, the time. Again, go to my graph editor. So when these things break, it seems to me that there's like a fast and then a slow. So I want to make my graph editor reflect that. So here, rather than doing an S curve, I'll do kind of like a C curve. So what this basically means is it's going to be a fast beginning, and then it'll come to a slow end here. Okay, and now I will grab these two keyframes, Command C, and put them all on the other beams, Command V. Okay, so now if I play this back, they kind of break that way. Now, you can sort of do this to your own taste, but, that's kind of what I want. As a matter of fact, maybe what I'm going to do is undo that, maybe make this a little bit longer here so it's not so fast, and then again, copy this to the other ones. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm going to kind of change some of these, the timing, because I don't want them all to be uniform. So I will select all my beam layers, hit the letter U, and I will just randomly kind of move these around. So maybe a couple of these I'll go earlier, a couple of them I'll go a little bit later, and just kind of randomize a lot of these. Now I could have done this probably with expressions and all that, but I don't want to make this whole tutorial about crazy expressions and have more and more expressions than necessary. So I'll just do this manually here. So let's go to all my beams here, and probably be quicker anyway if I, than trying to figure out expression for this. Some of them I'll just do a little bit, some of them a lot. Let's just kind of randomize the order here. Make sure not to move the actual layer, just move the keyframes. Okay, and then just do a couple more here, and we're basically done. So if I play this back, see now they're sort of randomly breaking apart. Okay, so now what we can also do is generate a couple more camera moves. So for example, I don't have to stop at this point, where it's just going down. I can go back into the beginning. So if I twirl all these up, go to my camera here, and let's say I want to have a little bit of a motion to introduce this network here. So what I can simply do is right where this camera first starts moving, I'll make 2 keyframes for X and Z position. I'll kind of go backwards to frame 0, and maybe what I'll do is have this come off screen if I drag my X position here. Okay, and I'm going to ease these 2 keyframes. And now I have something that looks like this, where it just comes into the shot here, and then it kind of drops down. And keep in mind, this is a 3D object, so you can do also rotation if you want to have it rotate in. So if I go into my R for rotation, again, I'll go into the place here where it drops down. Maybe what I'll do is do a little bit of a Y rotation. So as it's coming in my X, it's doing the sort of a starting point, and then it's orbiting around this, and then it drops down, just so that it looks like a 3D object. And I'll do a little bit of easy ease on that, just to keep things simple. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and I'll make more of these. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Revenge Motion Graphics.